It all started with a beige envelope. If you've ever lived in a place governed by a homeowners association, you know the one. It's not the friendly white of a birthday card or the professional manila of a job offer. It's beige, the official color of someone else's problem becoming yours. The shade of soul-crushing bureaucracy. This particular envelope, lying innocently in my mailbox, felt heavier than it should, as if weighted by the collective passive-aggressive sighs of the entire Creekwood Estates Architectural Review Committee. My name is Leo, and I used to think of myself as a reasonably patient man. I pay my taxes, I separate my recycling, I even bring my own reusable bags to the grocery store. I believed I was a good soldier in the quiet war of suburban living. But this beige envelope was my draft notice for a conflict I didn't want. I took it inside, placing it on the granite countertop like it was a live explosive. For a moment, I just stared at it. Maybe if I ignored it, it would cease to exist. Perhaps it was a coupon for a free lawn aeration service, a friendly reminder about the upcoming neighborhood potluck. Yeah, right. And maybe my mortgage would spontaneously forgive itself. With the resigned sigh of a man heading to the gallows, I tore it open. The paper was thick, creamy, and expensive, a tactile reminder that my own HOA dues were funding the very instruments of my torture. The letterhead was embossed with Creekwood Estates, complete with a pretentious little drawing of a leaf that was neither a creek nor wood. The text was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. Dear resident of 114 Willow Creek Lane, it began, because using my actual name would have been far too personal. This letter serves as a formal notification regarding a compliance review conducted on September 2, 2025. It has come to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee that the property at the aforementioned address is in violation of the Creekwood Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I felt my blood pressure tick up. What now? Was my grass a quarter-inch too high? Was the shade of my welcome mat not on the approved palette of earth tones? Specifically, the violation pertains to Bylaw 7, Section 4C, Driveway Surface Integrity. An irregularity, hereafter referred to as the pothole, has been identified on the northern quadrant of your asphalt driveway. As per our community standards, all driveway surfaces must be maintained in a smooth, unblemished, and continuous condition to ensure aesthetic harmony and resident safety. The pothole. They'd capitalized it. They'd given my tiny asphalt dimple a proper noun, elevating it from a simple nuisance to a named antagonist in the epic saga of my suburban existence. I walked to the front door and looked out. There it was. A slight depression near the garage, no bigger than a large dinner plate. It had been there for months, a silent, harmless resident of my driveway. Now, it was a criminal, a threat to aesthetic harmony. The letter continued, outlining the corrective actions required. The pothole needed to be professionally remediated within 14 calendar days. Failure to comply would result in a fine of $50, followed by an additional $10 per day until the matter was resolved. And then the signature, the final venomous cherry on top of this bureaucratic sundae. Sincerely, Brenda Kravitz, head of the Architectural Review Committee. Brenda. Of course it was Brenda. Brenda Kravitz was the self-appointed queen of our cul-de-sac. A woman in her late 50s with a helmet of blonde hair that could deflect small arms fire and eyes that narrowed in suspicion every time a car drove by a mile over the speed limit. She didn't just live in Creekwood Estates. She patrolled it. I'd seen her measure her neighbor's lawn with a ruler. I'd heard rumors she cross-referenced paint chips from the approved Benjamin Moore historical collection when someone repainted their shutters. She was the reason we had bylaws about the acceptable decibel level of wind chimes. Brenda didn't see neighbors. She saw potential violations walking around on two legs. I crumpled the letter in my fist, then immediately uncrumpled it, smoothing it out on the counter. Can't destroy the evidence. I pulled out my phone and called the only person who would understand the sheer depth of my rage. "Mark," I said when he answered, "I've received a declaration of war. It was disguised as a letter about asphalt." Mark's laugh crackled through the phone. He lived in a chaotic, glorious apartment downtown, a place where the only governing body was a landlord who communicated exclusively through text messages and didn't care what you did as long as the rent check cleared. The concept of an HOA was, to him, a source of endless fascination and mockery. "Let me guess, Brenda strikes again?" he asked. "Did you leave your recycling bin on the curb for an extra 7 minutes after pickup?" "Worse," I said, walking back to the door to stare at the accused. "I have a pothole, with a capital P. Apparently, it's a direct threat to the very fabric of our community, a blight on the aesthetic harmony of Creekwood Estates." "A pothole? Dude, just go to Home Depot, get a bag of that patch stuff, and fill it. It's a 5-minute job." "You don't understand, man," I said, my voice low and serious. I looked across the street to Brenda's immaculately landscaped property. Her windows were dark, but I could feel her presence. I swore I could see the blinds twitch. "This isn't about the pothole. This is about power. This is her planting a flag. Today it's my driveway. Tomorrow she'll be telling me my dog barks in an unapproved cadence." Mark was quiet for a second. Then he chuckled. "Okay, Tyrion Lannister. Just fix the tiny hole in your driveway before she musters her armies." We hung up, but his advice felt hollow. He was right, of course. The logical adult thing to do was to just fix it. But as I stood there, looking at that insignificant crater, a seed of rebellion began to sprout in the barren soil of my soul. Brenda wanted a fight. She just had no idea what kind of war she had started. The battle for 114 Willow Creek Lane had begun. For the first week, I engaged in the most powerful form of protest known to modern man: passive-aggressive procrastination. I'd see the pothole every morning when I left for work, and I'd give it a little nod, a silent salute between two co-conspirators. "Not today, my friend," I'd murmur. "Today we stand defiant." My defiance, however, had an expiration date. With the 14-day deadline ticking down, I finally succumbed to the pressure and decided to make a good-faith effort. Sort of. My first attempt at professional remediation involved my right foot and some loose gravel from the edge of my flower bed. I nudged the stones into the depression, scuffed them around until they looked vaguely level, and called it a day. I felt quite proud of my ingenuity. It was an eco-friendly, zero-cost solution. Brenda, a known advocate for the community garden, should have been proud. She wasn't. The next time it rained, my eco-friendly solution transformed into a muddy, gravel-strewn puddle, arguably uglier than the original pothole. It looked like the driveway had a case of acne. One problem down, 3 new ones created. With week 2 breathing down my neck, I made the pilgrimage to Home Depot. The asphalt repair aisle was a grim place, full of dusty bags and buckets promising quick fixes and permanent solutions. It smelled like tar and broken promises. I grabbed the smallest, cheapest bag of EZ Street Premium Cold Asphalt Patch. The guy on the bag was smiling, leaning on a shovel, looking entirely too happy to be dealing with asphalt. Liar. Back home, I read the instructions. Clean debris from hole. I did that. Pour contents into hole. Easy enough. Tamp down firmly. I didn't have a tamper, so I used the back of a garden spade, whacking at the lumpy black pile like I was trying to kill a snake. The stuff was oily, sticky, and smelled like a freshly paved highway to hell. I got more of it on my shoes and the surrounding concrete than in the actual hole. When I was done, the pothole was gone, replaced by what could only be described as a sad, lumpy charcoal briquette, that had been run over by a lawnmower. It was technically full, but it looked 10 times worse. The next morning, as I was leaving for work, the final nail was hammered into the coffin of my compliance. Brenda was out for her morning constitutional, her white Pomeranian, Sir Reginald Fluffington III, trotting ahead of her like a fluffy little herald of doom. She timed her approach perfectly, intersecting with me just as I was getting into my car. "Morning, Leo," she said, her voice dripping with the syrupy sweetness of a cobra. Sir Reginald yapped at my ankles in agreement. "Making some progress on the driveway improvement project?" She gestured with her chin toward the lumpy black scar on my driveway. Her smile was a terrifying baring of teeth that didn't come close to reaching her cold, calculating eyes. "Brenda," I replied, matching her smile with my own strained version. "Just admiring my handiwork. It's got a real rustic artisanal feel, don't you think? Very wabi-sabi." Her smile tightened. "The board requires a professional-grade, level surface, Leo. I'm sure you understand. The fines officially begin on Friday. Just a friendly reminder." She tugged on Sir Reginald's leash and continued her patrol, leaving me standing there stewing in a cloud of impotent rage. A friendly reminder. It was a threat wrapped in the guise of neighborhood pleasantry. That was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. The patient, rule-following Leo checked out, and a new, more chaotic Leo took the wheel. That night, I sat on my couch, nursing a beer and scrolling aimlessly through my phone, my mind racing. I couldn't give her the satisfaction of hiring a professional. That would be admitting defeat. But my own attempts were a disaster. I was trapped. And then the universe provided a sign. It came in the form of a viral video on social media. A guy with a magnificent beard and a flannel shirt was making something called an epoxy river table. He took 2 rough slabs of wood, placed them in a mold, and poured a shimmering, translucent blue resin into the gap between them. He swirled in some glitter, let it cure, and the result was a stunning, glass-smooth surface that looked like a miniature river trapped in wood. I sat bolt upright, the beer bottle frozen halfway to my lips. My brain, which had been grinding its gears in frustration all week, suddenly kicked into overdrive. The tumblers of a truly terrible, gloriously insane idea began to click into place. Epoxy. It was a permanent solution. It dried perfectly level. Brenda wanted a level surface. This would be as level as a sheet of ice. Brenda wanted the hole filled? This would be the most meticulously, permanently filled pothole in the history of suburban disputes. It was malicious compliance of the highest order. But it needed more. It needed a flourish, a piece de resistance, a message, something that screamed, "I've followed the letter of your law right off the cliff of sanity. What do you put in an epoxy river?" Fish. My mind flashed to the pet store, to the big tank near the back filled with hundreds of tiny, shimmering goldfish, swimming around aimlessly, selling for 15 cents apiece. I started laughing, a low, rumbling chuckle that grew into a full-blown, maniacal cackle. My dog, Buster, who had been asleep on the rug, lifted his head and gave me a look of deep concern. I grabbed my phone and speed-dialed Mark. "Mark, I've got it," I said, my voice buzzing with manic energy. "I know how to fix the pothole." "Oh, thank God," he said, his relief palpable. "Did you finally call a paving company? Did you come to your senses?" "Better," I said, pacing around my living room. "So much better. I'm not just going to fix the pothole. I'm going to turn it into a statement. I'm creating a miniature aquatic preserve, a monument to bureaucratic overreach and the indomitable human spirit." There was a long, deeply confused silence on the other end of the line. "Ooh. Leo," Mark said slowly, "have you been drinking paint thinner again?" I spent the next 10 minutes laying out the entire, beautiful, unhinged plan. The epoxy, the blue glitter, the tiny plastic plants, the goldfish. When I was done, another silence stretched out, this one filled with a mixture of awe and horror. "You are a madman," Mark finally whispered. "An absolute certifiable lunatic. You have to do it. You have to. And you have to send pictures. No, video. I want a full documentary." The path was clear. My purpose was renewed. I hung up the phone and grabbed a notepad. With the fervor of a general planning a pivotal battle, I wrote down my shopping list. Epoxy resin, industrial quantity, enough to entomb a small mammal. Blue and silver glitter, for that magical, ethereal quality. Tiny plastic aquarium plants. 20, 30 of the cheapest, most expendable-looking goldfish. Operation Driveway Aquarium was a go. The next day, I called in sick to work, citing a household emergency. It wasn't even a lie. My household was about to experience an emergency of artistic and rebellious proportions. My first stop was the hardware store, the big box kind where dreams of DIY projects go to die. I strode past the sensible aisles, plumbing, electrical, lawn care, and headed straight for the paints and adhesives. There it was, the epoxy resin section. I didn't grab the small hobbyist kits. I went for the main event, 2 one-gallon containers of a 2-part, crystal-clear, deep-pour epoxy. The kind of stuff you use to resurface a bar or create a piece of modern art that sells for thousands of dollars. I heaved the heavy jugs into my cart with a satisfying thud. I also grabbed a bag of iridescent blue glitter from the craft section, a bag of smooth river stones, and a cheap set of plastic mixing buckets. My cart was a bizarre collection of industrial chemicals and arts and crafts supplies. At the checkout, the cashier, a teenager named Kyle with tired eyes and an air of profound indifference, scanned my items. "Big project?" he asked, the words automatic, his eyes glued to his phone, which was propped up against the register. "Oh, you know," I said, feeling a surge of theatricality. "Just filling a void in my life, and in my driveway. It's a very metaphorical undertaking." "Cool," Kyle said, not looking up. He bagged my items. The fate of Creekwood Estate's aesthetic harmony rested in these plastic bags, and he couldn't have cared less. I loved him for it. My next stop was the pet store. The air inside was a humid mix of cedar shavings, fish water, and the faint, sweet smell of despair. I bypassed the adorable puppies and the exotic reptiles and headed for the back corner where the feeder fish lived. A massive tank churned with hundreds of identical dime-sized goldfish. They swam in a frantic, shimmering cloud, utterly oblivious to their station in life as future lizard food. They were perfect. An employee with a name tag that read Finn, I kid you not, approached me. "Can I help you find anything?" "Yes, Finn," I said with my most serious face. "I need goldfish, about 2 dozen. Finn looked at my empty hands. "Okay, for your pond, your turtle?" Here it was, the moment of justification. I had rehearsed my lie in the car. "They're for my nephew's school project," I said, trying to sound like a responsible uncle. "It's a diorama. A very large, very wet diorama. On the migration patterns of the North American goldfish." Finn squinted at me. "Sir, these are feeder fish. They're a type of carp. They don't really migrate, and they're native to East Asia." I waved a dismissive hand. "He's not a very good student," I confided. "It's more about the effort than the accuracy." Finn, thankfully, seemed to lose interest in my nephew's failing grades. He netted 30 goldfish with practiced efficiency and dumped them into a plastic bag filled with water. As he tied the knot, a pang of guilt hit me. I couldn't actually entomb living creatures in resin. I wasn't a monster. I was a performance artist. My plan needed a last-minute adjustment. "You know what?" I said. "While I'm here, do you have any of those little plastic fish? For decorating a fishbowl?" Finn pointed to an aisle. I returned a minute later with a small bag of cheap, brightly colored plastic goldfish that were roughly the same size as the live ones. I bought both. The real fish were my red herring. The plastic ones were my apostles of anarchy. That night, I waited until the last light had faded from the sky. The neighborhood was silent, save for the hum of air conditioners and the distant bark of a dog. It was time. Dressed in old clothes, I began my work under the dim glow of my porch light, moving with the quiet intensity of a saboteur. First, I prepared the pothole. I scrubbed it clean with a wire brush, removing every last speck of dust and my previously failed asphalt patch. It was now a pristine gray crater, a perfect canvas. I artfully arranged the smooth river stones at the bottom and planted a few of the tiny plastic ferns and seaweeds among them. Then came the glitter. I sprinkled the iridescent blue flakes with the flair of a TV chef, creating a shimmering, galaxy-like riverbed. Next, the main event, the epoxy. I donned rubber gloves and a respirator mask. The warning label on the jugs was no joke. I poured the two parts, the resin and the hardener, into a large plastic bucket and began to stir. The chemical smell, sharp and clean, filled the night air. I stirred for what felt like an eternity, ensuring the mixture was perfectly clear and free of bubbles. I poured the first layer, about an inch deep, letting it self-level into a glassy pool over the stones and glitter. The effect was already mesmerizing. Then, with the delicacy of a surgeon, I used tongs to place my plastic goldfish into the resin, arranging them in a dynamic, swirling pattern, as if they were frozen mid-swim. A few on their backs for realism. Finally, I mixed the second batch of epoxy and poured the top layer, filling the pothole to the brim until it was perfectly flush with the surrounding asphalt. I took out a small carpenter's level and placed it over the surface. The bubble was dead center. Perfect. Brenda wanted a level surface, and I had given her one, accurate to within a fraction of a degree. I stepped back to admire my creation. There, in the middle of my boring, conformist driveway, was a shimmering portal to another dimension. A circle of deep blue, sparkling with starlight, in which a school of goldfish was captured in a moment of eternal, silent beauty. It was the most beautiful, ridiculous, and defiant thing I had ever done. Exhausted but filled with a profound sense of accomplishment, I went inside, leaving my masterpiece to cure in the cool night air. The real goldfish swam happily in a spare bowl on my counter, my unwitting accomplices. Tomorrow, Brenda would see it. Tomorrow, the war would escalate. I was up before the sun, my body buzzing with a mixture of caffeine and nervous anticipation. I didn't dare turn on the lights. Instead, I sat in my darkened living room, peering through a crack in the blinds like a sniper in a foxhole. My target, Brenda Kravitz. My mission, to witness the precise moment her perfectly ordered world collided with my epoxy-fueled chaos. The street was quiet, draped in the soft, gray light of dawn. A newspaper delivery car whispered by. A lone jogger passed, oblivious to the subversive art installation just a few feet away. I sipped my coffee, my heart thumping a steady rhythm against my ribs. This felt more exciting than any deadline I'd ever had at my actual job. At precisely 7:15 a.m., as reliable as a Swiss watch, Brenda's front door opened. There she was, clad in a pink velour tracksuit, her blonde hair an immovable object even in the morning stillness. She bent down, picked up her perfectly rolled newspaper, and began her morning ritual, a slow, deliberate scan of her domain. Her eyes swept across the manicured lawns, the pristine facades, the silent, sleeping houses. She was a general surveying her troops, looking for any sign of dissent. Her gaze passed over my house once, then snapped back, drawn by some unnatural disturbance in the suburban force. She took a step off her porch, then another. Her casual morning stroll had transformed into a slow, deliberate march of inquiry. I held my breath. She reached the edge of my lawn, her head tilted. She took a few more steps, right to the edge of the driveway. She stopped. For a full 10 seconds, she just stood there, a statue of confused indignation. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to process the information her eyes were sending her. Then, she bent down. Not a full squat. That would have been undignified, but a stiff, cautious hinge at the waist. Her face got closer and closer to the driveway. Her expression shifted through a beautiful, dramatic series of emotions. First, simple curiosity. Then, deep confusion. It was followed by dawning disbelief, which quickly morphed into pure, unadulterated, grade-A rage. Her face turned a shade of crimson that clashed violently with her pink tracksuit. She straightened up so fast I thought she might get whiplash. She looked at my front door, her eyes blazing with the fire of 1,000 violated bylaws. Showtime. I took one last sip of coffee, put on my most pleasant, non-threatening smile, and walked out the front door as if I was just stepping out to enjoy the beautiful morning. "Morning, Brenda," I chirped, giving a friendly little wave. "Lovely day, isn't it?" She didn't respond. She just pointed a trembling finger at the driveway. "What?" she sputtered, the word catching in her throat. "What is that?" I strolled over, feigning curiosity. I looked down at my handiwork, which was now glinting beautifully in the morning sun. "Oh, that?" I said, beaming with pride. "Problem solved. I filled the pothole just like you asked. Deadline isn't until tomorrow, but I figured I'd be proactive." Brenda's jaw worked silently for a moment. "You filled it! You filled it with fish!" she finally shrieked, the sound echoing slightly in the quiet morning air. "And epoxy," I corrected her gently. "It's a permanent, professional-grade, level surface, see?" I reached out with my shoe and tapped the spot. It made a solid, satisfying thunk. "Violates 0 bylaws. I checked the Covenant Handbook last night. There is no mention of acceptable aggregate materials for pothole remediation. It's a bit of a loophole, you might say." "Loophole? This is a mockery, Leo. This is vandalism. You can't turn your driveway into a pet cemetery." "Now that's just hyperbole, Brenda," I chided. "They're not dead, they're preserved. It's art. It represents the beautiful stillness and crushing predictability of suburban life. The fish, they symbolize us, forever swimming in circles in our little ponds, unable to escape." It's very profound, actually. By now, our little drama had attracted an audience. Mr. Henderson from 2 doors down had paused his morning walk with his golden retriever. Mrs. Gable from across the street was peering over her rose bushes, her hand clasped over her mouth in horror. A small crowd was beginning to form at a respectful distance, as if observing a strange new species in its natural habitat. "This is not art!" Brenda hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "This is an abomination! It's a biohazard!" "Brenda, it's encased in 2 inches of solid, non-porous, chemically inert polymer resin," I explained patiently. "It's probably the most sanitary spot in the entire neighborhood right now. You could eat off of that. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could." Mr. Henderson let out a sound that was halfway between a cough and a laugh, which he quickly tried to cover up by pretending to discipline his dog. Brenda's eyes darted around at the gathering neighbors, her face flushing with humiliation. She had lost control of the narrative. She had come to enforce the law and had instead become the star of a bizarre piece of street theater. You will be hearing from my lawyer, she seethed, jabbing her finger at me. You will be hearing from the entire HOA board. This will not stand. She spun on her heel, yanked a bewildered Sir Reginald Fluffington III, and stormed back to her house, the automatic sprinklers on her lawn hissing at her in what I chose to interpret as a show of solidarity with me. I stood there for a moment, the conquering hero on my field of battle. Mr. Henderson gave me a slow, appreciative nod before continuing his walk. A few other neighbors just shook their heads and retreated into their homes, probably to gossip over the phone. I looked down at my creation. The sun was higher now, and the glittery blue depths of the pothole seemed to wink up at me. It was perfect. I had followed the rules. I had fixed the problem. And in doing so, I had driven Brenda Kravitz to the brink of madness. It was, without a doubt, the most productive morning I'd had all year. I knew Brenda wasn't just going to retreat and lick her wounds. Brenda was a creature of escalation. If a strongly worded letter didn't work, she moved to threats of fines. If threats didn't work, she went nuclear. I just didn't expect the mushroom cloud to appear quite so quickly. I was in my kitchen, making a celebratory second pot of coffee, when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a siren. It was faint at first, a distant wail, but it grew steadily louder, closer. I peeked through the blinds again. Sure enough, a police cruiser was turning onto our street, its lights flashing lazily in the bright morning sun. It slowed to a stop directly in front of my house. My stomach did a little flip. Okay, maybe this had gone a little further than I'd anticipated. Brenda was already marching out of her house to meet them, waving her arms like she was flagging down a rescue plane. 2 officers got out of the car. They didn't look like they were in a hurry. They moved with the slow, weary gait of men who had been called out for one too many cat-in-a-tree situations. One was older, with a graying mustache and a seen-it-all look on his face. The other was younger, taller, and looked like he was desperately trying not to be amused. I decided the best defense was a good, friendly offense. I walked outside, projecting an aura of calm, law-abiding citizenship. "Morning, officers. Is there a problem?" The older one, whose name tag read Miller, gestured toward Brenda. "Ma'am, you called 911 about a public disturbance?" His voice was flat, tired. "Yes," Brenda said, pointing at my driveway with the same trembling finger from before. "That man! He has embedded fish carcasses in his driveway. It's a health code violation. It's a biohazard. It's unnatural." Officer Miller and his younger partner, Officer Davis, slowly turned their heads to look at the pothole. They walked over and peered down at it. Davis crouched down for a closer look, his brow furrowed in concentration. "They're plastic, ma'am," Davis said, looking up at Brenda with a completely straight face. The air went out of Brenda's sails. "They're what?" "Plastic," I confirmed, stepping forward. "For verisimilitude. I'm an artist, not a monster. The real fish are safe and sound inside in a bowl. Would you like to see them? Their names are Finn Diesel and Gilbert." Officer Miller sighed. It was the deep, profound sigh of a man who had seen the full, strange spectrum of human pettiness and was no longer surprised by any of it. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Sir, is this your property?" "Yes, officer. 100%, I said. "And this is your driveway?" "Last I checked," I confirmed. "And you filled a pothole on your own property?" "I did," I said proudly. To the exact letter of the HOA bylaw, I might add. It is now a perfectly level, fully remediated surface. Officer Miller pinched the bridge of his nose, his eyes closed. "Ma'am," he said, turning back to Brenda without opening them, "is he breaking any actual laws?" "He's mocking me! He's mocking the entire community!" Brenda insisted. "Ma'am, mockery is not a criminal offense," Miller said, finally opening his eyes. As far as I can see, there's no law against having tacky decorations on your own private property. If there were, half this town would be in handcuffs, including my brother-in-law and his collection of garden gnomes. He turned to me. Sir, please try not to use 911 for HOA disputes in the future. He then gave Brenda a pointed look. Ma'am. With that, they turned, got back in their cruiser, and drove away, leaving a cloud of stunned silence in their wake. Brenda looked like she'd just been struck by lightning. She had summoned the full might of the law, and the law had just called her decorations tacky. My victory, however, was being documented. Standing on the sidewalk, a teenager from down the street named Kevin had been filming the entire exchange on his phone. He gave me a thumbs up and scurried away, no doubt to upload his footage to the great content machine of the internet. And that's when my phone started to buzz. It started with a text from Mark. Dude, a cop car, you're my hero. Then another, and another. Someone had posted Kevin's video to the town's community Facebook page. From there, it had been picked up by a local news blogger. By noon, my little act of suburban defiance was a local news story. The headline read, Suburban feud goes aquatic, man fixes pothole with Epoxy and Goldfish in Hoa showdown. My phone didn't stop buzzing for the rest of the day. Texts from old college friends. Messages from strangers on social media. A local pizza place even offered me a free large pie for standing up to the man. I had gone from being a quiet, anonymous cog in the suburban machine to a minor folk hero. I was the Pothole Picasso, the king of a 15-cent fish. I stood in my driveway, looking at my creation, now a bona fide local landmark. Cars were slowing down as they passed, their drivers pointing. I had won. I had beaten Brenda, the HOA, and the crushing forces of conformity. I had a permanent, fish-filled monument to my victory right in my own driveway, which I was slowly beginning to realize might actually be a new kind of problem. The sweet, sweet glow of victory lasted for about 48 hours. During that time, I was the undisputed king of Willow Creek Lane. I'd get waves from strangers when I went to get the mail. Mr. Henderson would give me a conspiratorial wink on his morning walks. The HOA sent me another letter, this one so full of legal jargon and impotent rage that I had it framed. It was a glorious time. But glory, like milk, has an expiration date. The initial triumph began to curdle into a slow-dawning, practical horror. I had won the battle, but in the process, I had essentially cemented a kitschy art project into the middle of my driveway. Forever. The novelty started to wear off. It was a pain to sweep around. I worried every time I backed my car out that I might crack the resin. And worst of all, I knew that eventually, years down the line, I would actually need to get my entire driveway repaved. The pothole was just the first sign of age. The whole thing was starting to look less like pristine blacktop and more like a map of London. And no paving company on earth was going to know what to do with a resin-encased aquatic diorama. My masterpiece had become my anchor. The symbol of my freedom was now my prison. The irony was not lost on me. With a heavy heart, I realized I had to undo my great work. I had to destroy my monument. I pulled out my phone and started calling local paving contractors. This, I soon discovered, was going to be its own special kind of hell. The first call was to a company called A+ Paving. They sounded promising. A Plus Paving, this is Dave, a cheerful voice answered. Hi, Dave, I said. My name is Leo. I live over in Creekwood Estates, and I'm looking to get a quote to have my driveway repaved. You bet, Dave said. Happy to help. Standard 2-car driveway. Any unusual grading or obstacles I should know about? Mostly standard, I said, choosing my words carefully. There is just one one small art installation that would need to be removed first. There was a pause. An art installation? Dave asked. Like a bird bath, a statue? Something more integrated, I explained. It's a pothole I filled with epoxy resin and some decorative elements. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear him breathing. Decorative elements? He finally asked, his voice cautious. Fish, I said, deciding to just rip the Band-Aid off. Plastic goldfish. The silence that followed was vast and profound. I thought maybe the call had dropped. Hello, Dave? Click. He had hung up on me. Just straight up hung up. I stared at my phone in disbelief. I had been ghosted by an asphalt guy. The next two calls went similarly. One guy laughed so hard he had to hand the phone to someone else. The other one just said, "Nope," and hung up. I was beginning to lose hope. Maybe I was doomed to have this thing in my driveway forever. Maybe my future kids would ask me about it, and I'd have to explain the great HOA war of 2025. Finally, I called a company with a simple, no-nonsense name, Sal's Paving and Seal Coating. An old, gravelly voice answered on the second ring. Sal's. I launched into my now well-rehearsed speech, explaining the situation with the driveway, the epoxy, and the decorative fish. I braced myself for the laughter or the hang-up. Instead, the gravelly voice just said, "Huh, no kidding. You're the fish guy." I was floored. You've heard of me? My grandson showed me the video, Sal grunted. Thought it was pretty damn funny. I'll be there in an hour. Gotta see this thing for myself. An hour later, a rusty but formidable-looking pickup truck pulled up. An older man got out. He had to be in his late 60s, with a sun-weathered face, a shock of white hair, and hands as thick and calloused as paving stones. This was Sal. He walked right up to the driveway, not even looking at me, and stared down at the pothole. He crouched down, running a finger over the smooth, glassy surface. He stood up, looked at my house, looked at Brenda's house across the street, and then finally looked at me. A slow, genuine grin spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Son," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I've been paving asphalt in this county for 45 years. I've paved over tree roots. I've dug up old septic tanks. I've even filled a hole where a meteor landed once. I thought I'd seen it all, but this..." He gestured at the pothole. "This is a first." "So, can you fix it?" I asked, my voice full of hope. Sal's grin widened. "Oh, I can fix it," he said, slapping me on the shoulder with a hand that felt like a slab of granite. "It's gonna take a jackhammer and some patience, but I can fix it. But the art removal fee is gonna be extra." He winked. "And I want the story. The whole damn story from start to finish." In that moment, I knew I had found my guy. Sal wasn't just a contractor, he was a kindred spirit. An artist who appreciated another artist's work, even if his medium was hot asphalt and mine was spite-fueled resin. An unlikely alliance was born on that driveway, right on top of a dozen eternally swimming plastic fish. Sal's demolition day was, in its own way, as much of a neighborhood event as the original unveiling. His big truck rumbled onto the street early in the morning, followed by a trailer carrying a small bobcat and an arsenal of heavy-duty tools. The sounds of industry, the clang of metal, the roar of an engine, were a stark contrast to the usual suburban symphony of lawn mowers and chirping birds. Neighbors peeked out of their windows. A few even came out onto their lawns to watch, sipping coffee and pretending they weren't completely invested in the final chapter of the Pothole saga. Sal and his two-man crew were all business. They cordoned off the driveway with yellow tape. Sal himself, wearing safety glasses and a look of grim determination, wielded a massive electric jackhammer. He placed the tip directly in the center of my masterpiece. You ready to say goodbye, kid? He yelled over the generator's hum. I gave him a solemn nod. Do what you must. The jackhammer roared to life, and the quiet cul-de-sac was filled with a deafening brrrr-pee-pee. The first crack appeared on the glassy surface, then another. It took nearly 10 minutes of brutal, bone-jarring work. But finally, with a mighty heave, Sal used a crowbar to pry the entire epoxy and fish-filled disc out of the ground. It came out in one surprisingly clean piece. He held it up like a trophy, a translucent circle filled with blue glitter and frozen fish. It was heavier and more substantial than I expected. Every war needs a souvenir, Sal said, handing it to me. His crew got to work, properly cleaning and preparing the hole for a fresh, hot patch of professional-grade asphalt. By lunchtime, it was done. My driveway was perfect, a seamless, black, utterly boring stretch of asphalt. The pothole was gone. Not just filled, but erased from existence. It was exactly what the HOA wanted, and it felt anticlimactic. Later that afternoon, I was sitting on my front porch, nursing a beer and looking at my ridiculously compliant driveway. The heavy, fish-filled disc sat on the table next to me. As if on cue, Brenda emerged from her house. She was heading to her mailbox. Our eyes met across the expanse of our lawns. For a moment, I thought she might ignore me, but instead she changed her course and walked to the edge of my property. She stood on the sidewalk, looking at the fresh patch of asphalt, then at me. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, just a kind of weary resignation. "The new driveway looks adequate," she said. It was the highest form of praise I was ever going to get from her. "Thanks, Brenda," I replied, raising my bottle in a small toast. "Meets all regulations, I promise." She gave a single, sharp nod, the suburban equivalent of a white flag, and walked away without another word. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a truce. A quiet acknowledgement that we had both fought our war, and now it was over. We would go back to being neighbors, forever bound by the shared memory of the fish in the driveway. That evening, Mark came over to celebrate the official end of hostilities. He found me in the living room, drilling a hole into the wall. My souvenir disc was propped up against the couch. "No way," he said, laughing. "You're not actually going to hang that thing up, are you?" "It's a war memorial," I said, deadpan. "It commemorates the fallen, Vin Diesel, Gilbert, and all the others." He helped me mount it on the wall, where it caught the light from the lamp, a circle of shimmering, absurd blue. We stepped back and admired it. "So, was it worth it?" Mark asked, cracking open a beer. "The cost of Sal's art removal fee, the cops, the near-universal condemnation from every woman over 60 on your block?" I looked at the ridiculous trophy on my wall. I thought about the beige envelope, Brenda's smug face, and the soul-crushing weight of the bylaws. Then I thought about the thrill of rebellion, the camaraderie with a grizzled old paving contractor, and the sheer, unadulterated joy of watching Brenda's face when she first saw the fish. "I have a brand new, perfectly fixed driveway," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I'm a certified local legend, and Brenda Kravitz, head of the Architectural Review Committee, now looks at me with a healthy dose of fear in her eyes." I took a long drink of my beer. "So yeah, Mark, it was worth it. Every single drop of epoxy.